Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the Guilty as Charged podcast, coming to you live on a Saturday morning. My name is Steven, and I am the host as always. And joining me is my guy Tyler. Tyler, what's up, man? How was your Christmas party, and how you doing today?
Christmas party was fantastic. We did a white elephant exchange, and I got the lamp from A Christmas Story, which is perfect because I love that movie. So that was my white elephant gift. Um, I feel refreshed, honestly, for many reasons, but in particular, kind of what we're discussing today. It just feels like we can breathe. It feels like there's a new beginning happening, which can sometimes be, scary, can induce some anxiety, but at the same time, and really more than anything else, it just feels like a breath of fresh air. And so honestly, not that my fandom necessarily has been renewed, but I just feel like it's all more interesting now. I'm more invested, and so I'm glad in a sense that we're doing this now, and we get to just progress and move forward and start talking about the future.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Ricardo's saying it feels like the healing process has started. I think that is
Exactly.
totally fair. And we talked yesterday, Arjun, Alex, and I, like we have been put in a position, obviously, where this team felt like it was just like kind of headed towards a wall. Like it felt like there was no real direction with this team this year, and we all kind of agree, like remembering that after the Jacksonville game last year, the four of us sat on this show and wanted a fresh start for the franchise, and unfortunately we didn't get that at that time. We got bought into another season. Obviously the Kellen Moore hiring helped a lot of that kind of general excitement, which hasn't necessarily panned out that way either. But now this week moving forward, like we get to really have a clean slate from both sides of things. Like I know that there was real, I don't want to say concern, but like kind of anxiousness, anxiety about this organization keeping Tom Telesco and hiring another head coach with him. But now we get a fully clean slate for this team, and they can move forward in any number of directions. And I think that is ultimately what is best. I think that has been an issue. Tom Telesco, it was very kind on our show with us. He was great with his time. And one of the things that I've always respected about him is that he genuinely like does work well with his head coaches. But at the same time, it just works better when you have GM and head coach in the same kind of phase of their career. This is my first GM job. This is my first head coaching job. Maybe like we're coming in this thing together, and you are kind of guiding the ship at the same time, and you have the same kind of vision for it. So I think that has been a bit of an issue for the Chargers, and now they hopefully get the chance to find two guys who can come in, work together, have the same vision, and like Dean Spano said, like the ultimate goal is a championship, and it hasn't been good enough. So now hopefully we can get a true fresh start, and it certainly sounds like that's what's going to happen.
It was required. People have used different words. I think someone used the word stale, and that's just like the perfect way to put it. Maybe
Yeah.
that was Daniel Popper. It really just felt stale to the point where, whether it's the offense with Joe Lombardi, we knew what the plays were going to be. With the defense, there was a bingo card we could have all made where we knew exactly what was going to happen. With the
Yep.
draft, Quentin Johnson was such the most obvious thing they could have done, which I
Yeah.
wish we had called. But like we started to pick up all the habits, and fans just kind of knew how everything was going to go. And in the
Yep.
stands, we knew how things were going to go. We felt that way. I've talked about it a lot this year about just the fan sentiment in the stands. Like it's stale, it's predictable, and it was time. Appreciate obviously, like you said, Tom Telesco for joining us on the show once. Um, there has been like mild successes. I've enjoyed a lot of watching Chargers football over the last decade, but at the same time, it is very clear that it was time for a change. Could have argued, several years ago with Brandon Staley being hired initially, that was a time to make a GM switch. Regardless, that's all in the past. We are now here to talk about this new start, and it feels great. It's very different. I bought season tickets the year Tom Telesco became GM, not
Mm.
because of Tom Telesco. It just happened to be, new
That's when you
coach,
were
new
ready for it. Yeah.
GM. Yeah, so we're like, okay, you know what? Here's the time that we're gonna buy season tickets, and that was a long time ago. So much has changed. 3 different stadiums, different cities, different quarterbacks, like 3 different coaches. So much has changed. But I'm glad like this is big change. This isn't just sliding in a new coach.
Yeah.
And one that maybe we could even guess given Tom Telesco's sort of history of hiring people. it just feels different. There's a big pendulum swing that could occur. This could be a very strong pivot point for the organization, and hopefully it's one of these coaches that we're about to discuss.
Yeah, hopefully, and we're gonna dive into a lot of that today. So we complete transparency here. Tyler and I have been working on this list for a few weeks now, and so we've been making preparations. Obviously, I don't know how much we really ever bought into a mid-season change, but we said this yesterday at the end of that Raiders game that you didn't have a choice. Like it had to be a clean sweep at that point with the way that game changed. So today we're going to go over the guys that Tyler and I feel like are the top candidates of this class. There are other candidates that are certainly deserving of interviews. There are other candidates certainly that are worth mentioning, but we want to kind of really dive into this class of coaches and give a lot of different kind of perspectives on it. So this is going to be we have several months to cover this coaching cycle, right? Because you can't start interviewing coaches until after the playoffs start. So today we're really focusing in on the top candidates, and this is our opinion. Obviously, this is how we have worked through this show, and we'll dive into it. But really quickly, Tyler, what are your thoughts about Giff Smith being the interim head coach? Obviously, you were the first one to kind of mention his name on Twitter about his potential candidacy as interim head coach. What are your thoughts there as he gets this chance to guide this team for the final 3 weeks of the season?
I didn't expect it at first because Ryan Fick and Kellen Moore, and we've been discussing this. I was like, no matter what happens, it's probably one of those two. But you get some help and occasionally come up with a good idea, not entirely on your own, and threw that out there. It makes sense, I think, in the sense that you want to evaluate, I think in particular, Kellen Moore as much as possible, giving him the head coaching duties. While of course you might want to see him as a head coach, you got to figure out if he can be an offensive coordinator first. And I was not impressed we didn't do a post game. I was not impressed with the Easton Stick plan against the Raiders at all. I think he only had his first official run, and it was a scramble in like the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
Nothing designed there. Embarrassing. So I get why they would go with Giff Smith, to be completely honest. Let Ficken do his thing. Let Kellen Moore do his thing. Derek Ansley is going to call plays, it sounds like. Giff Smith, it sounds like he also might stay through a new coaching change, especially if Joey Bosa is there. They're basically inseparable. Now, if Joey Bosa does get traded, then maybe Giff Smith moves on, but it's another discussion for another time.
Well, Giff and Khalil are super close now too.
Yeah. I'm very interested. There's not much more to gain from this season, but for the most part, you have all the defensive pieces you sort of set out to start the year with, other than Joey and then JC. I don't know how much that really counts. So what can you do with this defense? How are you going to play differently against the Bills and the Chiefs? Like, what are we going to see? It's very exciting. I don't know. It could be terrible, but you know what? It can't be worse, dude. I just watched 63 points. And guess what? It can't get worse than that. So if Giff Smith and Derek these are low-key auditions that I'm very excited for. I didn't think we'd get to see this. And Staley has very much so suggested, he's not giving up any defensive play calling. They believe in the system, etc. Well, he's definitely not calling plays now.
Yeah.
So what does it look like? Does the defense look energized? How does Derwin James look? How much can you change? I don't know. What are all these guys' different roles? So I'm excited to see what the defense can do with maybe some renewed energy. Because look at Pierce and the Raiders.
Yeah.
I mean, they've been holding guys to under 2 touchdowns easily with the same guys, and Max Crosby on one good knee, but they're playing really well, just energized by a change.
Yeah.
So I'm curious overall how the Chargers play from here.
Yeah. First of all, regarding Kellen Moore, I was shocked by that game plan on Thursday night, and it looked like the same exact offense that they were running under Justin Herbert, which is just completely unacceptable to me as an offensive coordinator, where you're going to put in a guy like Easton Stick and say, hey, run the Justin Herbert offense. You are only designing, I think you designed like maybe more bootlegs. That was kind of an emphasis I noticed, but it wasn't like you designed any different run game. It wasn't like you used his legs as his advantage, which they talked about doing. And then also they only called play action on like 20% of his dropbacks that night. Like that's just it. That's poor offensive coaching. Like Brandon Staley obviously deserves a lot of flack for the way that game went down, but Kellen Moore also deserves a lot of flack for the way that game went down. Like he did not coach to maximize Easton Stick's skill set in that game on Thursday night. So uh, if that trend continues, then we're talking about a very completely different thing. Like there is a head coaching candidate, obviously Dan Quinn, who people are talking about, like, oh, like he can keep Kellen Moore. And Ian Rappaport mentioned the possibility of Kellen Moore staying on, maybe being a part of like the package of like, hey, like you can hire your whole staff, but Kellen Moore has to stay. It, I think he is coaching for the opportunity to stick around. Like he has to prove to us that he can coach this offense without Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen. And I don't know, Keenan Allen might play this week, but you have to adapt to the skill sets. That was one of the things that I loved about his candidacy coming into the season, and he hasn't done that so far. So that I think is an important thing to talk about. Regarding the defense, like I think one of the things that Daniel Popper wrote in his thing was that Brandon Staley was so confident in his vision and his message that he never really made changes to it. And it was always just like expecting the players to catch up to him in a sense. And a lot of the players who Daniel Popper spoke with off the record, they were not, obviously not on record, but it was a lot of just like overkill. And it was a lot of just like moving parts. And they had so many rules to X amount of looks and things like that. And you could see it this season in particular with how many different like moving pieces there were from a personnel standpoint, and just like the lack of communication in general, and like how difficult it was for them. So we'll see what Derek Ansley and Gift Smith design up. It is going to be very interesting to see what these two do. Derek Ansley, I'm not quite sure what his future in the NFL is. Like I think he has made his bones in college football, and he could certainly return to that level if he wanted to. But I'm a big believer in who he is as a leader and as a teacher. And this is a great opportunity for him to say, hey, look, like maybe it's not with the Chargers, but if he can kind of settle things down from a defensive perspective, then that's a great thing to do. I mean, listen, they play the Bills on Saturday. If they hold the Bills down to a competitive level after giving up 63 points to the Raiders, like that's a pretty big, feather in his cap. So I am curious to see what these two are able to put together. And Gift Smith, obviously, it's a leadership standpoint. It's a get us back to being competitive, not necessarily winning games, but just kind of raise the floor of this team and what they do to close out the season, build some confidence among these guys, because a lot of them are still playing for jobs, whether it's with the Chargers or not. Like you want them to have the opportunity to put out quality film, and that just was not going to be the case with Brandon Staley sticking around.
No, not one bit. The team, it wasn't just bad; it was just deflated. It was mostly just kind of giving up on our television on prime time, which almost feels like its own message upstairs to everyone. I will say, Derek Ansley, just either what you hear or even just when we were on the sideline at training camp and what you see, these players love Derek Ansley.
Yeah.
Derek Ansley is just, when he's on the sideline, he's like the most popular kid in school, and everyone just follows him and gravitates toward him. These players, and Derwin James in particular, every time was just right next to him. The DBs, of course, because they're closer, just love him. So I think there's an aspect where they go, let's just, hey, we've got something to prove. We can also just do it for this guy or do it for Gift Smith. And Gift Smith is obviously very well respected too. So, there's a ton of love for Derek Ansley, which I think can make the defense look a bit better. And of course, like Gift Smith is actually just really good at his job. And so I think, I don't know, man, we'll see. But if I don't know what I'd prefer to see at this point, but I'm very curious how much the Chargers can turn things around, because they can't get worse than they did against the Raiders, but I am curious how much better they can get when they're facing the Bills.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. They play the Broncos again. They play the Chiefs. Like it's going to be tough for them to have a complete turnaround. But I think just like more competitiveness, more energy, and like all of us will be happy. Again, none of us are expecting wins. Like no disrespect, Gift Smith, I do not want you to win a single game. I am aiming for that draft pick. It is what it is. It sounds like CJ Stroud is not playing this week, so the Titans could win this game pretty easily. So I want a top 5 pick if possible. So I hope Gift does well. I hope the defense kind of plays with more energy. But I also just don't think they're going to win. Like, they don't have enough on offense to beat the Bills, Broncos, and Chiefs in 3 straight weeks. So it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. If you're wanting to go to a primetime game on Saturday night, you can get tickets for as low as $40 at this current moment. And hey, man, it's still primetime game. You still get to see Josh Allen and all those guys. So could be fun. All right, Tyler, let's talk about now, like, before we dive into this class specifically, we wanted to kind of touch on some topics that are really being hotly discussed on social media, whether it's on Facebook or Twitter or whatever the case may be. And I think the place to start this is specifically what is our top priority and how we are kind of starting this coaching search. A lot of people, their top priority is experience. A lot of it is offense. A lot of it is fix the defense. A lot of guys want or don't want an inexperienced coach who's not been in the league for a long time, whatever the case may be. So, Tyler, we'll start with you. What is your top priority when looking at a head coaching candidate in this cycle?
It's going to be experience then, and which maybe that gives away my number one when we talk about this list of guys. But yeah, it's going to be experience for me. That does not mean that another attribute, like, I don't know, being a defensive play caller, will not drop you down a bit. But if I had to pick one thing, it would be experience, followed by, of course, offense, being an offensive minded person. And I think like either is completely fine to me. It feels a bit 1A, 1B. But if you told me to pick, it would be experience.
I think that's fair. To qualify experience, are you specifically talking about former head coaching experience?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I think that's fair. I think for me, my top priority heading into this coaching search is stability around Justin Herbert. This is your top guy when you're looking at what this team can look like in 2025 and beyond. Justin Herbert and Rashawn Slater are maybe the only guys currently on the roster who will be on the roster in 2025. Like, this roster is going to turn over quite a bit. And Justin Herbert, this is going to be his third head coach in the NFL. This would be his did he have 3 head coaches? No, he only had 2 head coaches in college. So this will be his 5th head coach since he got to Oregon as a freshman. This, presumably, if they get a new play caller, would be his 8th play caller since he was a freshman in college. Mm-hmm. To me, this franchise is going to go as Justin Herbert goes. And to me, getting that long-term stability around him is my top priority. And I think some of that too is just also like the defensive roster construction. Like, Brandon Staley was always going to inherit a defense that was already stockpiled with key players. That's not the case for whoever this new head coach is going to be. This defensive roster is going to be completely different next year and very, very different after that. So for me, like, my top priority is stability around Justin Herbert. That, of course, could mean a defensive coach, but at the end of the day, it's just easier to accomplish when you have a offensive-minded coach. So that's my priority, stability around Justin Herbert.
Yeah, absolutely. Preparing for this and just looking through. First of all, thank you, Natalie, if you're listening. She's a big Oregon fan, and kind of I'm like, hey, just tell me who was at Oregon when Herbert was there. I don't want to do all the research. And just looking through the different offensive coordinators or play callers or just the head coach that was a play caller. I mean, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2020, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 3 different guys at Oregon. And then, of course, with Justin Herbert, 2020, 21, 2022, we had Lombardi, 2023 had Moore, and now it could be another guy, which, is partially some reason to keep Kellen Moore, of course. Like, I would understand the argument for that. But yes, the stability around Justin Herbert is absolutely key because this just can't keep happening. And I'm sure there's an effect. I don't know if someone can quantify it or really study it, but you can tell Justin Herbert is learning his 8th offense or 7th offense and will be his 8th offense. Like, that's too much. He's very smart, but there's so many different reads and ideas and keys and looks and calls and names. And, everything is a little bit different with each person. That's got to be so frustrating. I mean, he's every year having to relearn the book again. And sure, there's some core staples in there, but you can never reach that ceiling if you're consistently having to recycle through, year 1 playbook, year 1 playbook, year 1 playbook. Now we saw Lombardi's year 2 playbook. Wasn't great, but we're hoping for a little bit better than that moving forward.
Yeah, I think in general, like so much of like calling a successful offense is that relationship between the quarterback and the play caller. And you can't do that when you're just constantly cycling through guys. Like, for all the gripe that we gave Shane Steichen during 2020, he was never really able to build a relationship with Justin Herbert. I mean, he was so focused on like building a relationship with Tyrod and like establishing that game plan. And of course, like COVID played a factor there. And then Joe Lombardi, for a variety of different issues, like his offense fell off the cliff. But with Kellen Moore, they had a positive relationship like outside of football, but that's completely different when you are trying to build an offense out together. And this year specifically, like Justin Herbert is taking a significantly larger role in the protection scheme and overall like how the scheme was going to work. And it just makes things easier when you have that longevity to build a relationship with a guy. And I mean, like that, it's just like we're seeing it around the league, what these guys are able to do with the experience of the relationship and how important that is. So I think that is something. The experience aspect of this is definitely important. Like I definitely can't understand why people are advocating for an experienced head coaching candidate, but we're going to talk about this too. I just don't know how viable a lot of these options are. And so I think limiting yourself as a fan, as a team, to we only want experienced head coaches, well, then you're closing the door on a lot of really interesting candidates. And my thing that I tweeted out today is like, okay, so everybody, from what I can tell, wants Jim Harbaugh and wants Bill Belichick. But what if those two aren't available? What if Jim Harbaugh gets that extension at Michigan? What if Bill Belichick decided to retire? I don't think Bill will decide to retire, but you probably have to trade for Bill Belichick. What if the Washington Commanders throw a huge package of trade assets at the Patriots and you just don't even get to the chance to trade for him? Are you going to advocate the same way for Dan Quinn, for Raheem Morris, for Brian Flores, these other guys who have head coaching experience? Or is the experience thing only related to Jim Harbaugh and Bill Belichick? That's kind of where I'm trying to figure out where fans are at, because I think it is an interesting conversation. Everybody wants experience, but where's the line of like coaches where I don't
Right.
want that experience anymore?
Yeah, that's definitely the tough part, and we'll get in. Like we're about to get into it, so I guess
Yeah.
at some point we should talk about some of the guys we're evaluating and weighing the differences. But yeah, don't not experience for the sake of experience. Add them
Right.
to the list. Got to consider these guys. And sometimes it's great because they come with a potential GM. So like sometimes that hand in hand works or whatever. But yeah, experience for the sake of experience is not great. But I still, for me, experience is what won out in the end for my first pick.
No, I think that's totally fair. I do think that's totally fair. All right. Before we get to these candidates, we do have some super chats we got to get to. First and foremost, Tyler's mom, she says, #fresh start. Let's go. Appreciate it. And then Tara Romero, appreciate you guys so much. Thanks for everything. Most importantly, being my weekly therapist. Do we think Spanos will shell out big bucks for an experienced head coach? Feeding right into that same conversation. What are your thoughts there, Tyler, about the amount of money that the Spanos family might be looking to spend this year?
I guess big bucks. I don't know, like how much Dan Quinn would command, for example. So I think we're really just talking about Belichick and Harbaugh really here.
Yeah.
I don't think. Look, I think that every year the Chargers have. No, this is with Tom Telesco. Every year the Chargers have hired a head coach. It feels just different than the last one. McCoy was the first guy. Okay, so what? So but he was just milk toast Mike. So let's go get the locker room, the people's champion. Let's go get Anthony Lynn. Anthony Lynn does his thing, doesn't work out in the end. Okay, let's go get a defensive mind. And let's go get a more forward-thinking, analytics, aggressive type. And that doesn't work out. So really, what is your last option here? Not last option. We'll talk about others. But I could see them making another different kind of thing. I also think, and this is the same reason we sort of discussed Sean Payton and some other bigger names throughout the years, including Jim Harbaugh. They got to get their fan base under control, and they got to like get people in the stands, because Antonio Gates, jersey retirement, number retirement, Ring of Honor ceremony was orange, so they really got to figure that aspect as well. So, what is can you gain more in the long term by shelling out the dollars now? That's the big debate, right? So I think because it could be a departure from the 3 coaches they've had, again, needing to make the splash to be any bit relevant in LA. I think that this would be the opportunity to do it. With that said, I don't know that they'll actually do it, but there are reasons to believe that they would do it.
I think if Jim Harbaugh is available, I think they'll get at the table with the conversation regarding finances. Um, for whatever your thought process is, like they did hire Martin Schottenheimer, they did hire Norv Turner. It's not like they've never hired experienced head coaches before. They've also been spending money at a different level. And Arjun talked about this yesterday. Like, of course, you have the salary cap, but exactly based on how much money they've shelled out to the players in the last 2 years and the percentage of that money they've guaranteed, they're probably ready to pay up for a coach this time. I couldn't agree more with what Arjun is saying. They paid out a small fortune for the practice facility. Like they're proving that they are ready and willing to spend money to capture the LA market. So I don't think that money is going to be an objective this time around. It's really just a matter of if those coaches become available. Next one here from Ernesto. Appreciate Ernesto. Joey Bosa either restructure or traded. Khalil Mack, I feel he would want to be traded or might retire. DJ needs to restructure as well. Mike should restructure too. Lot to dive into there. We'll not to dismiss this question here, but I think so much of this depends on like who they hire. Obviously, you know, I think roster questions probably have to take a pause right now until we get those things answered.
Yeah, I agree. We've sort of discussed these, but a lot of it's going to change. 2 of those players are gone next year.
Yeah, I don't think Mike Williams is back next year. I think that is comfortable. I think we can say that. Who they decide between Khalil and Joey, I think, does depend on who they hire. Tara back here again. Do you guys think Herbert being out made the Spanos realize how bad this team coaching staff performed without Herbert to see how much he covered?
I think they definitely noticed, but I think just getting embarrassed by Pierce and Aiden O'Connell, I feel like this firing was in the works given the trajectory of the season. And, you know, we sort of danced around it, but we said they would not do anything until the Chargers were mathematically eliminated. So that also happened. Yeah. So I just think that everything was almost a perfect storm for it to be easy for them.
Yeah, I think they needed to hit rock bottom, and
yeah,
giving up 63 points to the Raiders certainly qualifies as rock bottom. But yeah, I think if that game was 24-17, I think Brandon Staley and Tom Telesco still have a job right now.
Yeah.
Then we have a super sticker from Burley. Appreciate that. Thank you guys so much for all of the super stickers heading into today. So we got about a half hour left. We'll dive into these guys. Have to tell you quickly about Prize Picks as well as Little Caesars. We're not going to do specific picks this week, but obviously Prize Picks has been a ton of fun. It's a daily fantasy use app. You guys can use it all the way through the Super Bowl, and you can check out the code GUILTY at prizepicks.com/guilty for a deposit match up to $100. And then Little Caesars as well is a great option for pizza on Sundays during game days. They have NFL kickoff specials as well as a very quick pizza portal pickup. So go check out a hot and ready Little Caesars pizza, breadsticks, all that good stuff on game days. Check out Little Caesars, the official pizza sponsor of the NFL and the Los Angeles Chargers. All right, Tyler, let's get to this coaching search. So first and foremost, we are only diving into our tier 1 candidates today. We'll dive into some of the other candidates throughout the rest of this cycle. We have a lot of stuff to cover with these guys, so I'm excited to dive in here. We did want to qualify exactly what are we referring to, or who are we referring to in regards to a tier 1 or tier 2 or tier 3 coach. So Tyler, why don't you talk about real quickly how we kind of broke this down for this purpose of the show?
Yeah, tier 1 is obviously going to be the top candidates. Steven and I might agree or disagree on the ranking of them, but in general, these guys seem to be the tier 1 candidates. We'll see how much availability there is of these candidates, but they are the top guys. These are the ones that are going to be highly coveted in the search process. And for the most part, they check every box that we are looking for. You know, whatever Steven prioritizes, whatever I prioritize, really what a lot of fans prioritize. These are the guys that check the most boxes for the Chargers. These are the ones that these would be the best fits, I think. would do the most for the Chargers. So like, for example, not a lot of defensive guys on this tier 1 list. In fact, I think only one, and for one specific reason, really. Some things that we'll talk about later, but tier 2 and tier 3, these guys for the most part are quote unquote the perfect fits.
Yeah, and then obviously tier 2, those are guys outside looking in, not completely checking all of the boxes, potentially lacking experience, potentially more defensive minded projection, stuff like that. And then tier 3, that's more kind of solid resumes, deserving of an interview, but lacking in several areas. So we're talking about the cream of the crop today. We'll dive into these guys from an experience standpoint. What do they bring to the table? What are they currently doing? What's working in their current role? And then potentially talk about some coaches that they could bring with them as well, due to their connections around the league. So let's dive into the first one here, which is obviously Jim Harbaugh, who we mentioned. Jim Harbaugh is obviously currently the coach of the Michigan Wolverines. Depending how long that goes, we could see this gentleman be very interested in leaving the college football world as soon as next year. He's also flirted with the NFL for like the last decade, ever since leaving the San Francisco 49ers. From a salary perspective, just kind of touching on that point real quick. The word on the street in terms of the rumors is that Michigan's offer is around $11 million per year, which would put him right behind Nick Saban and Kirby Smart in terms of highest paid college coaches. So for what it's worth, if you're talking about salary, like, you probably got to get at least ahead of $12 million in your offer. So just wanted to throw that out there. Previous teams, obviously, he worked for the University of San Diego, University of Stanford, coached at the 49ers, and coached currently at the University of Michigan. So, Tyler, what's kind of your pros and cons of Jim Harbaugh potentially being the coach of the Chargers?
Yeah, the pros for me is that this is the experienced coach that I'm looking for, that is a proven winner at every level. And that is what's been thrown around over and over again with him, but it is true. And the Chargers need not just an offensive reset or a defensive reset or whatever. Like, the Chargers need an organizational, cultural reset, even just starting from the stand. So during the Broncos game, when they mentioned that the Chargers Justin Herbert had only used a verbal he had never used a verbal cadence during their games that entire season. A former offensive lineman for the Chargers reached out and said, I don't recall any other time the Chargers have been able to use a verbal cadence at home, except for against the Giants that one year, and they stunk. The Giants were absolutely terrible. Otherwise, it's been a shit show in the stands because of the lack of fans and a lack of enthusiasm. And obviously everything on the field is what we've seen on the field. The Chargers are chargering. They're currently, I don't mean this to be like a personal thing, but in terms of the organization, they are losers. They are chokers. They charger. They put the definition of chargering on my screen against the Raiders. This is who the Chargers are right now. And fans don't care. It's the lowest my fandom has certainly ever been. And you're losing. And so you need someone who can change the culture of your entire organization. And it's kind of for better or worse. Way back when we were talking about Urban Meyer, sure, he was like 7th on my list of the guys that you could add. But the reason for Urban Meyer was, look, we're going to have, at least for better or worse, we're going to have a culture shift. Things are going to change. Now, dodge that one. But with Jim Harbaugh, it is going to be a significant culture shift. And the Chargers absolutely need that right now. They need direction. They need to bring, I think you listed here in the pros, physical and aggressive identity. What is the positive identity for the Chargers at any point? I don't know, other than losing. It's all basically negative. There's no identity outside of, Justin Herbert saved us this week, or oops, darn, offensive line didn't protect this week, and the defense sucks. Keenan. That's it. There's no identity. Jim Harbaugh does bring an identity. He brings a winning culture. He brings an identity. They are aggressive. Looking at the Broncos, I don't know how aggressive Peyton has been. I haven't really followed the Broncos a ton, but the last time I looked, when we were preparing for the Broncos show, they won like 2 of their 1-score games the previous year, and they were up to either 4 or 5 by the time that we had covered them prior to Broncos week. Like, there's just a shift that needs to happen that goes beyond just drafting one better player or calling one more play. It needs to be a culture shift. The Chargers need to stop charging. I'm sick of watching it. I'm sick of covering it. And now we've watched the Chargers blow the hugest lead in the playoffs a year ago, and then not give up the most points in franchise history a few days ago. This needs to end. It's got to stop. And honestly, I can't. This is probably the last thing I'll add to this. We can't wait for another ramp up period. We can't wait for, now we can wait depending on the coaching hire, but generally we can't wait for a ramp up period for this team to get going in a few more years. Now, it might be more of a 2025 team given how many changes they're going to have to make, but they can jumpstart earlier and not have to wait for the ramp up period for some of these first year guys. I assume with Harbaugh, I'm not saying they're going to win a Super Bowl in year one, but there's just less things to figure out. You already get the media, you get the day-to-day, you get everything about it, you get being a head coach, you get the responsibilities, the phone calls you have to make, the sponsors you got to talk to, like all that stuff is already covered when you have an experienced head coach. So to me, more than anything else, the Chargers need a complete culture change. That does not mean that can come from a first-year head coach, because some of these guys can definitely change the culture of your team. And we've just seen that. Shane Steichen, Mike McDaniel, we've seen these guys. So I'm not against that. But to me, this is kind of both the safest bet, potentially, and I think also partially the highest ceiling. He's won at every level. He has won. And I think the Chargers just need this mindset shift. We're not just waiting to lose. We're going to win. That's what we need. And as a fan, I need to feel that again.
Yeah, I think that's very well said across the board in terms of the credibility that Jim Harbaugh would bring to you. And like, I think a lot of people are clamoring for Bill Belichick, but I think more than anybody else, Jim Harbaugh gets you to that table where it would turn around how the fan base feels about the team in 1 second. And of course there are other, comparisons here, but the thing with Jim Harbaugh, excuse me, that I love the most is that physicality that his teams have always played with. I mean, like you look at across the board of like how the Stanford Cardinal played, how the 49ers played, how Michigan has played. Physicality is their core identity. And some of that I think maybe doesn't play as much in the NFL these days, but I think it's a step in the right direction from a physicality, from an aggressive standpoint. And I think at the same time, like we talked about the offensive line issues, and I still believe in the players that they have, but a lot of it is just like how they are being coached and like how they are, approaching these things from a game plan perspective. Jim Harbaugh is going to come in and fix that. Like you are going to play physical in these with Jim Harbaugh as your coach. And I think there's a lot of things that you can talk about with Jim Harbaugh regarding his personality, but so many of his players have come out and said like, yeah, like he's a little bit tough to work under, but he's going to make sure that we are flying around every single day of practice, every single game, every single second, because that's how he coaches. That's what he believes in, is that physicality, is that aggressive nature. And I think also he just makes things easier on his players. His players have that confidence to go out there and play to their best ability. And I think like in a weird way, this current season where he's been suspended for 6 games has only like strengthened his reputation of who he is as a leader. I mean, you have his assistant head coach, Sharon Moore, like crying in an interview because he loves coaching under Jim Harbaugh so much. And, you have all the free Harbaugh stuff from his current Michigan players and like all the bet things or whatever like that. Like how many other programs like really would have been able to go undefeated, win the Big Ten without their head coach for 6 games? If Alabama didn't have Nick Saban for 6 games, like where would they be? And like where would Ohio State be for 6 games without Ryan Day? Like it's a legitimate thing that I think has strengthened his coaching candidacy. The only thing really regarding Jim Harbaugh that I think is worth mentioning is like really what's his interest level in the NFL and specifically coaching the Chargers. There is that clip, obviously, of Mike Greenberg saying that him and Jim Harbaugh were like at a funeral, which like is the weirdest thing possible to me. Like they're at a funeral and they're just ranting about how much they love Justin Herbert. It's a weird thing to say, honestly. I just have such a hard time like wrapping my head around it. But I would understand why he likes Justin Herbert so much theoretically,
Yeah.
because Justin Herbert has always reminded me of Andrew Luck. Like they are so similar from a style standpoint, from a physical ability standpoint. So it would make sense to me that Jim Harbaugh would really like coaching Justin Herbert. Um, the negatives, I guess, really is it is his personality. Like he does have the tendency to rub people the wrong way. He's had a really tough time with like the Michigan. I think it's the president. They've had a really like rocky relationship. Obviously, things went really sour with the 49ers. I don't know if things ever went that sour with Stanford, but it is an interesting thing to talk about. Like, would he be able to come in and would the Spanos family be willing to really like deal with his personality across a longevity thing? Because again, for me, I'm trying. I don't know if you can hear my dog barking. I apologize about that. But for me, I want a coach to be here for the long haul around Justin Herbert, and I don't know with 100% if that's the case for Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. I think the one, and really the most important thing is Justin Herbert here. If he reminds them of Andrew Luck, awesome. I think that Justin Herbert is uniquely in who he is perfect for Jim Harbaugh because he can handle it. He can take it. And this is a guy that was headed to med school. Like he was going to, 4.0 in biology, he was going to go to med school. He's the kind of football psycho junkie, I want to just, take all of it in. I want to be coached. I want to be pushed. I want to be better. I want to be my best. And, I'm not saying he has to be best friends with Jim Harbaugh, but I think that Herbert is someone who absolutely would respond to this. Not everybody can. I can't say that for everyone. I would have loved to see like Rivers and Harbaugh yell at each other for an entire season.
Facts. That would have been funny. Yeah.
It would have been funny, and they probably would have won. And they maybe hated each other the whole way, but they would have won. But no, I think Herbert is a particular person that would respond very well to this. Now upstairs, we'll see. But listen, at some point, just go count your money. Like if Harbaugh comes in and wins and you don't like him all that much, look, dude, we all got to work with people we don't like a whole lot. But if they're making you money, I'll tell you what, man, do not care. I do not care one bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So Jim Harbaugh is he number one on your list then?
Sorry, of course I unmute or mute and then I missed the button 37 times. Yes, Jim Harbaugh is my number one.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Let's get to the next candidate here on the list, which is, sorry, I did that one. Okay. Next one here on the list is Mr. Ben Johnson. He's the current Lions offensive coordinator. You look at his previous teams, he worked as an assistant tight ends coach for Boston College before jumping to the NFL with the Miami Dolphins, where he worked as the assistant quarterback coach, wide receiver coach, tight end, and wide receiver coach. He has a lot of different experience there. And then he's been with the Detroit Lions for the last several years, where he's worked again as a tight end coach, quarterback coach, and the offensive coordinator. You look at his resume and the aspect of things that make him work. I think it's a diverse offensive attack that is currently ranking 7th in DVOA, 5th in rushing EPA per play, and 14th in passing EPA per play. So for me, I look at Ben Johnson and I think, one of the things that's so important for me as a coaching candidate is the diversity of your experience. And Jim Harbaugh has that across different levels. But Mr. Ben Johnson has that across different positions. He's worked his way up through the NFL in several different positions. He's been in the NFL for around 11 years. Dan Campbell loves this man and speaks incredibly highly of him. And we all saw what his offense looks like in person a few weeks ago. And it's just I just mentioned it with Jim Harbaugh. It's the physicality, it's the intention that he plays with. And the Underdog Fantasy guys did a great thing with Josh McCown last year and talking about Ben Johnson in his first year as the coordinator, how he would just build things throughout the rest of the game plan. And like everybody kind of remembers the Penei Sewell catch, but Ben Johnson set that up with a different play looking the same way where they actually ran the football. So I look at like the top offensive minds. Again, I mentioned that's my most important thing is long-term stability around Justin Herbert. Outside of Jim Harbaugh, I think Ben Johnson is the top offensive candidate. And part of that is also that he is able to call plays as well. So the diversity of his scheme, the experience here, the success of the offense
Mhm.
really is what is bringing Ben Johnson to the table. He could have taken a job last year. He, I think, smartly waited another year with the Detroit Lions, has that experience built up here, working under Dan Campbell, learning all of the game management things from Dan Campbell, which Dan Campbell is objectively one of the best in the league at gaining those hidden areas
Exactly.
of support in the game manager perspective. So Ben Johnson has been around that. He's been around that culture in Detroit that they're building. So I think Harbaugh and Ben Johnson is very, very close in terms of the top candidate, but Ben Johnson is right in that conversation for me because of what he's doing in Detroit.
Yeah, he's my coach number 2. Like it is 1 and 2 for me. And so if Harbaugh decides to return or not go to the NFL at all, yeah, Ben Johnson would be the number 1 candidate for me. And he's clearly the best offensive option available. We'll talk about, some guys in this group, some guys in different tiers. They maybe had like 1 year. It's been really good, but it's only been 1 year, right?
Yeah.
With Ben Johnson, we saw it last year too. It's very unique that you get to see 2 years of great offensive play calling from a guy and it be consistent. There was no drop off necessarily. They've dealt with a lot of offensive line injuries and shuffling, and I think you have the specific number or a stat somewhere. But they've dealt with a lot along the offensive line, and still they continue to hum. It hasn't completely fallen off of a cliff. Yes, of course, having Penei Sewell definitely helps, but they've had a lot of shuffling. I mean, they just got back a bunch of their interior offensive linemen when they played the Chargers. Like at that point, they had not had, I think, 3 of their offensive linemen, and they were still doing just fine. What you talked about, there's an X's and O's, but there's also an identity that comes with the team. And I think, I think some of that's the Dan Campbell influence, of course, but they just have this sort of vibe that I think Justin Herbert in this offense really needs that I just haven't really quite seen, but I think it would be positive for them. So that's great. Of course, like I do think there's an aspect of we're going to win, not we might not lose, that Ben Johnson plays with. And they also just develop guys really, really well. I mean, it's easy when a lot of these guys are in the first or second round. We talk about like Hawkinson, Swift, Sewell, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs, Sam Laporta. How much better would the Chargers be if they just basically every offensive player that they took early on just turned into a really good player? It's like, okay, Hawkinson, we're going to turn him into a great tight end. Well, I mean, he was anyway coming out of college. We'll trade him. Let's take Sam Laporta. Great. Now we have another really great tight end, like just like that. And the Chargers may go get Brock Bowers in the first round. So it just sounds like a really, really nice pairing right there.
Yeah.
A really good offensive play caller with a really good, player potentially. And then for me, just beyond that, bringing the Lions front office with them. Not that he has to, right? But the Lions have done an excellent job of drafting. A couple of weeks ago, we covered, and compared draft classes. The Lions have like 12 starters from their last 3 classes, and they're all pretty good.
Yeah.
They're all really contributing. It's not like starter because there's an injury. It's because they're pretty good. And that's why the Lions are, pretty good team right now. Some of that, of course, is on defense. But if you can find somebody in that wheelhouse to bring over, I just think Ben Johnson as a play caller, of course, if it's an offensive mind, the stability he brings, that's very attractive. But if you can bring some of that staff with you, some of the department with you, like I think you're doing really, really well. Not just some of these guys we're looking at, not just as the individual person, but the entire package now, which is something we haven't been able to do.
Yeah.
Right. Because it was just Tom Telesco was the GM. So just which coach. But it's different now. Which of these guys can bring in the best overall plan and who has the most, different cards to play. And I think Ben Johnson, like, hey, I'm a great offensive play caller. Oh, by the way, have you seen how the Lions have drafted the last few years?
Yeah.
I'm going to bring that over here too. And I think that's just really, enticing.
And I think like people are obviously like the comparison is like they don't need another coordinator, blah, blah, blah. This is a completely different situation. Like Ben Johnson has grinded his way in the NFL for 10 plus years. He has multiple years of calling plays. And you mentioned like the personnel thing, like they traded TJ Hawkinson away and the offense didn't miss a beat. This is an offense that has Jared Goff at quarterback, and Jared Goff is a good quarterback, but it's not like he's dealing with, an elite quarterback who is going to elevate his offense. He is the driving force of the offense. You talk about the offensive line, and yeah, like when everybody is healthy, the offensive line is arguably the best in the league. The problem with them from an offensive line perspective and using that as like a reason why you don't like him is that Their starting 5 offensive line has only played 24% of the snaps of the season. You're talking
Wow.
about like basically 3 games that they have played all together from a 5 perspective. They have started 6 different combinations this year from an offensive line perspective. It's not like they're completely healthy. They don't have all of their guys. I mean, Penei Sewell had to flip back to left tackle for a little bit this season. Last year, you had guys like Dan Skipper starting for 6 or 7 games, and the offense did not miss a beat. You look at the receiver perspective. Yes, they have Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's fantastic. Who was instrumental in his development? Ben Johnson. Who else do they have from a receiver perspective? Everybody points to like them drafting Jamison Williams. The man has like 7 catches. Like he's not
13. I looked it up.
13. Okay. It's not like he has this amazing wide receiver cast. This isn't Cincinnati where you have 2 elite wide receiver ones, you have a great wide receiver 2, you have an awesome wide receiver room. They don't. I mean, they're getting high end play from Khalif Raymond, who's been an NFL journeyman. You know, they have Josh Reynolds. So it's not an elite supporting cast. Ben Johnson is the driving force of the Detroit Lions offense. And maybe there's some identity things that he's kind of rolling with from a Dan Campbell perspective, but it's not like he's going to come into his head coaching role and be like, hey, you know what, all that physicality stuff I did in Detroit, I'm good. Like, I don't want to do that anymore. Like, this is how he wants to coach. If it's not, he would have left last year. Like, he wanted to learn from Dan Campbell and absorb everything he possibly could from Dan Campbell. And I think that's going to carry into to wherever he coaches as a head coach in the future.
Yeah, I agree. Really the only con here for me is what everyone's been discussing, which is the first time head coach thing.
And I get it.
Which I understand. Like, believe it or not, a lot of the cons for a lot of these guys are going to be first time head coach. It just happens. A lot of these guys. That's a con for a lot of these guys. Of course, it's just naturally going to happen. You're not an experienced coach until you are an experienced coach. That's it. It's kind of like, starting the job market and they want to hire someone with 4 years of experience, but no one has 4 years experience until they get hired. So the drawback for me, obviously, is the last few years with the Chargers and them being unable to, like, I think they've had, let's say, like for Anthony Lynn, for example, they've had progression and they've had good things start. I don't want to say that there was like no progression of these first time coaches, because I think that there was, and I think there are some good things they tried with Lynn, with Staley, of course. The difference is they never stayed there, or they never just took that next step. They never continued to develop as coaches. They never got to be, actual good long-time head coaches. And so that is definitely the concern. I think Ben Johnson would be my number one, if not for those concerns. For me, I do think this is different than Anthony Lynn. Like, Ben Johnson, what he's done with the offense is very different than what, Anthony Lynn has done. And Ben Johnson, even just compared to Brandon Staley, if you saw 2 years of Brandon Staley, maybe, and he got another year as defensive coordinator, and they were in a really good defense again, then, maybe Brandon Staley is a very different head coach. But he had the 1 year, jumped to the Chargers, and now the rest is history. Ben Johnson, I think, just with the 2 years, it's better. He's a better first-time head coach than the Chargers have hired before, and I am not going to let him being a first-time head coach completely remove me from even considering him, because, like you said, offense and stability and Justin Herbert, like, these are the important things, and in theory, he can provide all of that.
Yeah, I think objectively speaking, Ben Johnson is a significantly better head coaching candidate than anybody the Chargers have hired in the last 3 cycles here. So connections is a big aspect here. I think the inability of Brandon Staley to put a high-end staff around him was one thing that certainly contributed to him not having a job today. Ben Johnson has a significantly fun Rolodex of coaches to work with. He was in Miami with like a crazy good staff. Darrell Bevo has been there, and Detroit with him. Dennis Allen was in Miami at the time. Chris Gasurik, the 49ers defensive line coach, was in Miami at the time. Deuce Staley, Mark Brunell. I put Shane Day on there, really just like, I don't know how Justin Herbert would feel about working with him again, but like, I think that could be something that's worth exploring. Zach Taylor was with Ben Johnson in Miami. Like, he has a significantly greater ability to potentially hire high-end assistants. Like, I think that's a way for new head coaches to kind of hedge the experience margin is putting yourself around experienced head assistant coaches. That's not something Brandon Staley did. And I think that is something that he would tell you he probably regrets about his time with the Chargers. A lot of it was position coaches. And again, guys, I think you can talk about positively, but Ben Johnson has the ability to put a really high-end staff together because of his experiences, because of his connections. I mean, like, really, like, Dennis Allen is not a lousy head coach, but like, think about a Ben Johnson and Dennis Allen pairing from an offensive and defensive perspective, what that could look like for the Chargers. Or Chris Kasurek, maybe he's able to pry him away from San Francisco to make him a defensive coordinator. The coaching connections for me are definitely part of why I really am very excited about Ben Johnson as a possibility here.
Yeah, you never know how some of these guys pan out. You hope for better for some hires like Swinton, and then definitely doesn't work out. The most important next hire for Ben Johnson would be to find. I mean, obviously Ryan Ficken might stay for the Chargers, but find the defensive equivalent of a Ryan Ficken, just someone who can come in and immediately stabilize things. And I don't know if the Chargers need to hire a great defensive coordinator. That'd be great. Being, like the Ravens, who are just good at everything, would be awesome. Just get us to the mid 15s, 16s, just get us anywhere that seems respectable.
Yeah.
That's really all you need. Maybe.
All right, Tyler, let's get to the next one here. We're going longer as usual. All right, Dan Quinn, current defensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys. His most recent experience is obviously Florida defensive coordinator from 2009 to 2010. He was the Seahawks defensive coordinator in the Legion of Boom days. And then obviously the Falcons head coach from 2015 and 2020. Currently, his defense ranks 3rd in pass EPA per play, 7th in rushing defense EPA per play, and then 5th in DVOA right now. So I think this is a candidate. There's a lot of hot takes, or not hot takes, I guess, but there's a lot of takes out there for Dan Quinn. Where do you land on like the pros and cons of potentially interviewing and hiring Dan Quinn?
Yeah, this is definitely the experience part, but then, so the pros is experience, right? This is why you add him. And I think that one good news is the defense will be a lot better with Dan Quinn overall. So that's great. And I just think that, like Ben Johnson, maybe even more so, they can pull some really great staff from the Cowboys. Also, in terms of the personnel department, you could pull from there. Wherever Dan Quinn can pull from, there's plenty that Dan Quinn can pull from to create a really experienced, strong staff, department, etc. The reason he's 3rd, or if anybody else has a different spot for him, fine. He's defensive coach, and I don't need another 5 offensive coordinators for Justin Herbert. So there's definitely an aspect of stabilization here, of being, again, getting everything, understanding everything, being a coach, having gone to a Super Bowl. Losing in a Super Bowl is better than not making one, I think, for the Chargers. I'd love to get there, honestly. But yeah, as Alex says, wouldn't mind him leaving Dallas. He's been really good, and the defense develops guys very, very well. They've drafted very well in Dallas. So you're definitely going from a defensive perspective, from an experience perspective, you're gonna get plenty. But one, as you pointed out, the fizzling out in Atlanta isn't great. Of course, all these guys that are experienced guys fizzles out for one reason or another.
Yeah.
And then two, just the offensive perspective. How many times are we cycling through another guy? Maybe he retains Kellen Moore for one more year. Great. If Kellen Moore does well, then there you go. There's he's for 1 year, you've got Kellen Moore again, and then he's a head coach or whatever. So these are the tier 1 guys, right? But I do feel like he's in the tier 2 of the tier 1. To me, Ben Johnson and Jim Harbaugh are the guys.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's totally fair. I think like that's the thing about talking about experience is that it dries up pretty quick. This is not a great cycle for experienced head coaching candidates, but I think when you look at objectively at Dan Quinn and what he's able to do, and again, like people remember Atlanta and like how it ended. They were in the Super Bowl with Matt Ryan at quarterback. Like it's not like, again, obviously Kyle Shanahan and everything is a big important part of that. Who had to hire Kyle Shanahan? Dan Quinn. Dan Quinn put that staff together. Like you certainly did get credit for that. So I think you look objectively at Dan Quinn. He's built elite defenses with the Seahawks in a very different scheme than what he's doing right now with an elite defense in the Dallas Cowboys. You know, the Dallas Cowboys right now are one of the man heaviest units in the league. They are running simulated pressures at one of the highest rates in the league. Like, what he's doing is the perfect defense for modern football. What he did in Seattle with the cover 3 defense was the perfect defense at that time in that era. So again, you can talk to me about fizzling out in Atlanta, but this is a guy who has several years of putting together elite defenses and winning at the highest level. No team over the last 3 years has won more regular season games than the Dallas Cowboys. Yes, it hasn't panned out to a ton of postseason success for a variety of reasons. Maybe it does this year. Maybe the Cowboys are able to get to the Super Bowl. Maybe they're able to win the Super Bowl this year. And then you're talking about a guy who has won or been to a Super Bowl at 3 different places. Like, he definitely deserves credit for that. To me, you're talking about an identity. Dan Quinn has made his bones in coaching and elevating defensive line play. And that is definitely something that I know Chargers fans have really been clamoring for, is a stronger emphasis of defensive line play. How many times have I heard Chargers fans say, look at the 49ers, look at the Eagles, look at the Cowboys, look at the Jets and what they do from a defensive line perspective. Dan Quinn is definitely one of those guys who has brought that to the table. And I think, like, the difference in experience, how he has elevated people, how he has developed people. Like, yes, he has Micah Parsons, but he also has developed Osa Odigizua. He's also developed all these other guys. I mean, look at what Deron Bland has done for them, who was a 5th-round draft pick. So the experience of a defensive coach is vast. It is very successful, but he is a defensive coach. Like, that's the con for me. I think Dan Quinn is a very high-end head coaching candidate. I don't know how much I want a defensive coordinator again, but if I want one, it is Dan Quinn. And there are a lot of takes out there for what he does for how it fizzled out in Atlanta from a lot of the same people who want Bill Belichick. And you want to talk to me about fizzling out as a coach? Look at the New England Patriots over the last 3 years and tell me that that's not just as bad, or if not worse, as what happened in Atlanta.
Yeah, no, the Bill Belichick thing, one, we got to even figure out if he's even an option, and that would require the Patriots to fire him, basically. I don't think trading for him is on the table for the Chargers. I am very curious, because now we're 3 candidates in. Chat, who do you want? Because I don't think I see anybody you guys agree on, other than maybe Harbaugh. Like, who is your top 3? I'll be completely honest, because sometimes while Steven talks, I'll go look over at the chat, and it's like, okay, Harbaugh would be a disaster. Ben Johnson would be a disaster. Dan Quinn would be a disaster. And I'm like, I'll coach the Chargers if you want, but that will definitely be a disaster. So like, what do we want? And then, Slowick. Okay, well, interesting. I'm glad you guys all pointed that out. Interesting. Yeah, no, okay. Well, we'll get to that soon. I'm just very curious. What are you guys prioritizing and looking for? Because, like, there's no real perfect candidate maybe out there. And even if you like Harbaugh and you think he's the perfect candidate, he might not even be around in the cycle. So, like, Lincoln Riley, shut up, Archon. Head coach. We'll score 50, maybe. Yeah. So that's cool.
Gonna call 4 verts all game long. Let's go. But no, in all seriousness, wrapping up about Dan Quinn, I think his connections are also something to bring to the table here. He's got all the Shanahan guys. He's got all that stuff. He's got Darrell Bevel in his pocket potentially. So there's some high-end connections here to be worth talking about. All right, we're an hour and 4 minutes in. We'll mention some of these guys briefly. We did feel like mentioning Frank Smith just because of how much respect we have for what he has been able to do from an offensive line perspective, from a culture perspective. So he's obviously the current offensive coordinator for the Miami Dolphins, which is a very different kind of scheme than what he has been used to. He is a Sean Payton, John Gruden guy through and through. So coaching in Miami and learning from Mike McDaniel, I think, is absolutely something that should strengthen his case as a potential head coach. Most recently, he's been the tight ends coach for the Raiders. He was the obviously run game offensive line coach for the Chargers. And we've all seen what the run game and offensive line has looked like without Mr. Frank Smith.
Mm-hmm.
Miami Dolphins obviously currently have an elite offense, third in passing EPA per play, second in rushing EPA per play, second in DVOA. And you want to talk about a shuffling offensive line, like they don't have their starting center, they haven't had their starting left tackle in weeks. It's been tough. He's resurrected the career of Austin Jackson. We know what he's done with the Chargers. So, Tyler, where do you ultimately land on Frank Smith being a candidate? Obviously, we have him in the tier 1. Do you think he stacks up equally as a guy like Ben Johnson or somebody else that we have in here after him?
I think if he were calling plays, would be honestly, if he were calling plays and that was Miami's offense, he's there with Ben Johnson, but he's not calling plays, so that does make the difference there. But I do believe he belongs here. The complete reversal of fortunes for that Dolphins offensive line might be one of the most impressive turnarounds I've ever seen for a particular unit since watching football. Like that Dolphins offensive line sucked. They were terrible. And now 2 of them might make the Pro Bowl. And that's not talking like Armstead. You talked about Austin Jackson. Terrible, awful offensive lineman. Might be a Pro Bowl player this year. I mean, what he's been able to do with the Chargers and then, of course, with the Lions in that specific aspect is incredible. And, we'll see what he could do in terms of connections and who he can bring in. But you want to elevate the floor of this team. And let's say, again, talking about going and getting Brock Bowers, the run game difference, the difference in offensive line, what Frank Smith would provide from that perspective just shoots the Chargers way up, I would believe. Even if as a play caller, maybe he's not 100% perfect, just the development and progression of players, just player development along the blocking unit, offensive line, tight ends in particular, and in the run game, it's going to be so much better because we've seen it. We've both seen it with him here and then without him here. And then we've seen what the Dolphins looked like before him and after him. And sure, there's an aspect of, maybe health or different players, Mike McDaniel scheme, sure. But like you can very much, you can pluck Frank Smith out from all this as a common denominator of fixing awful situations. And he's a player, he's a coach who's been familiar with the Chargers. So he can walk in. The Chargers are stuck with 4 of their 5 offensive linemen next year, probably. Mm-hmm. And so you need Frank Smith to walk in and go, yeah, I can fix that. No problem. 1 year. I know these guys. I know some of these guys, at least. I know the building, let's do this. And Frank Smith can walk in and like fix that specific issue very, very quickly. So I respect what he's done. There's a clear positive influence everywhere he goes. And I think just understanding Justin Herbert already, having, a relationship there, being respected by all the coaches, the staff also that he could bring. I think he's a really, really strong candidate. Again, first year candidate, not the play caller. Those are the 2 big detractors. So to me, like he's in that, if we did a top 3, he would not be on the top 3.
Yeah, I think you highlighted a lot of the points here. I think from a play calling perspective, it wouldn't be him calling plays, but it would be his offense. Like I think you could have a similar kind of deal with like what Nick Sirianni is doing in Philadelphia, where it's other people calling plays, but it's his offensive identity. Like he's the one ultimately like pulling the strings. And I look at his offensive versatility as just something I would be very, very interested in. From an X's and O's standpoint, you're talking about, the meta of offense right now is the Miami Dolphins, the San Francisco 49ers, the Rams, and what they're able to do. You talk about fixing the run game. You talk about fixing the offensive line, all things that I think the Chargers are in need of. And you can hire, an offensive coordinator to execute that aspect. And so I think that Frank Smith checks a lot of the boxes for me from a leadership standpoint as well. You hear about the way that he changed Darren Waller's life, the way that you hear about how easy he made things on Rashawn Slater, Austin Jackson. These guys have all been so vocal in their support for him. And that clip, man, of like him being asked about like what it means to be a head coaching candidate. And he just broke down. Like he had an emotional moment about that aspect of things. How much it means to him, and how much his players love and respect him. I think is a super important thing for him. So you look at like his connections, right? Like he's been in the league for a long time. He's got He was in New Orleans, so similar to Ben Johnson, he could hire Dennis Allen as a defensive coordinator. He could hire those anybody from that Rolodex. Now he's got the coaches in Miami. He could hire the Miami coaches. He's also connected. Daryl Bevell is there. Jim Bob Cooter is there. Like, those are experienced play callers that he could hire in Miami to bring with him. So there's a pretty nice chance that Frank Smith could put together a great staff. He knows the building. He knows the culture that he would want to change and establish. I think that is good. But at the same time, I do kind of think that the Chargers do need like a clean reset. And I don't know if that would happen with Frank Smith. I think he could keep a lot of the same staff intact. So I think that goes both ways, as like a positive and as a concern in this case. But Frank Smith, to me, absolutely has he checks the leadership boxes, he checks the culture boxes, he checks the offensive line, the run game boxes. It really is just like a couple things here or there that I wish would be a little bit different as a head coaching candidate.
Yeah, I totally understand that. All right, let's get to Mr. Bobby Slowick, who I didn't realize the chat would be so fond of.
Yeah, this is our last one, so I guess that's kind of a hot take. We're not going to talk about Bill Belichick in the same kind of category, so it is what it is. Bobby Slowick, Houston Texans offensive coordinator. He was an assistant coach with the Washington Commanders as a defensive coach. Yes, you are hearing that correctly. The offensive coordinator used to be a defensive coach. When he got to the San Francisco 49ers, he started out as a defensive quality control coach, working with DeMeco Ryans in that regard. Then he switched to the offensive side of the football. He was the pass game specialist, and then obviously as a pass game coordinator. And now he is calling plays for one of the best rookie quarterback seasons, if not the best rookie quarterback seasons we have ever seen in the NFL. From an EPA per play standpoint, the passing game significantly better than the rushing game. So that is something to take into consideration. But they're 8th in passing EPA per play, 12th overall in DVOA here. Again, CJ Stroud, rookie quarterback, they're 8th in passing DVOA. You want to talk to me about offensive line injuries, man? Let me tell you about the Houston Texans this year. They have not started a single game with their projected starting 5 this year. Laremy Tunsil has missed games. Titus Howard is out for the season. Their starting center has missed games. Scott Questenberry, their backup center, has been out for the season. Their starting left guard, Kenyon Green, out for the season. I feel like I'm even forgetting some. Like this unit has had a ton of injuries. Starting Tank Dell, Nico Collins at wide receiver, Dalton Schultz at tight end. Like, it's not like this unit has a ton of elite personnel, but man, is he getting the most out of CJ Stroud right now.
And that's what it really comes down to for me. I think I consider putting another name in here. I think we could wait till the next tier. Honestly, if I was doing a tier 1, maybe Slowick wouldn't be on it for me. At the same time, I think he would be 5th for me. So in the top 5, he is 5th for me. And watching the Texans and watching what Stroud is doing, if you just like watch them, watch that offense, it's what you want Herbert to get back to doing and looking like. There's just this perfect marriage and empowerment of Stroud's physical tools and the confidence. There's just like a confidence. I don't know how to describe it, but there's a vibe with the way the Texans play in terms of the passing game. There's just confidence. And part of that stems from their head coach, of course, obviously. But they just attack a certain way and play a certain way that reminds me of the times where Justin Herbert is just on and having fun. And there's structure to it, of course, but there's some out of structure stuff as well. And it just seems like a great system to allow you to be the best version of yourself. So I just think that and watching that is a reason to include Bobby Slowick, who I wasn't really sure about, but the more you go into it and the more you see, obviously, the staff that he could pull from, I think that is very, very enticing. If I might like other defensive coordinators more in terms of coordinator versus coordinator,
sure,
but I don't want a defensive head coach, really. So to me, it's got to focus then on these offensive guys. And I think Slowick is someone, again, I'm not super comfortable with it because of the lack of play calling experience, of course. And then the run game regression with Pierce is kind of weird, but maybe that's an offensive line thing as well. But he's still a very, very solid candidate, the hangups being what we've already talked about.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head thing for me. I think this is this is strictly like what I envision like Justin Herbert's offense being and like how to get the most out of him. What do I want that to look like? And pairing him with Bobby Slowick, I think makes a lot of sense. The concerns for me, like you mentioned, are the lack of experience, lack of track record, and then the coaching staff. I just don't know, like, really where his Rolodex is at. Like, I was having a hard time finding coaches that I would be very interested in him working with. The Houston Texans coaching staff, I feel like, is not super appealing. Gerard Johnson is there as the quarterback's coach. It's the guy the Chargers interviewed as an offensive coordinator candidate. Shane Day is there as well. So like there is some familiarity with those guys, but like it's hard for me to nail down like the defensive guys because most of them are already like head coaching candidates or head coaches, excuse me, or defensive coordinators that they would have to like pry away from. Like it's hard for me to find that those connections. So I think from a schematic standpoint, I like him enough to put him in this coaching candidate pool and put him in this top tier. But those concerns, I understand why somebody would have him out. As Arjun points out too, you know, Bobby Slowick did work for Pro Football Focus. He has that kind of, you know, data driven background that I think makes him a potential interesting coaching candidate. You could pull from a GM candidate as well from San Francisco, who we'll talk about on a different show. So I think there's a ton of things to talk about with him, that there are positives, but at the same time, like you mentioned, there might be defensive coordinators who have like better resumes than him, like Raheem Morris, like a Brian Flores. I just don't I don't know if I want to get there. I would rather have an offensive coordinator mind like Bobby Slowick as opposed to those guys in the defensive coordinator world.
Right. Completely agree.
All right. Next time we talk about this, we are going to talk about some of those coaching candidates, including Mike McDonald, Eric Bieniemy, Brian Callahan, Todd Monken, Brian Johnson, and some others. But that's it for our tier one. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that conversation. Obviously, Tyler and I are not very interested in hiring Bill Belichick. He did not make our tier one. I will, out of respect, put him in my second tier for what he has done. But I don't know what your take is on Bill Belichick if you want to get it off quickly, Tyler. But me personally, it's a hard pass. I'm not interested. I cannot look at the last 3 years of what the Patriots have looked like and be interested in any aspect of what has happened in New England. I do not want him anywhere close to Justin Herbert. And that's my take about Bill Belichick.
Yeah, other than the defense improving, Belichick could retire in 2 years or 1 year and whatever. I have no idea, but you don't have an idea either. If you are in on Bill Belichick, totally get it. And he'd be very different, and it would be probably a change for the organization. Is it positive? I'm not sure. Go look at the draft history for the Patriots over the last few years. So go look at those last 3 draft classes, then imagine Matt Patricia and Josh McDaniels. Okay. And let me know. And I don't know which one's on offense or defense, by the way, when I say that. like somebody, he hired Matt Patricia to call offensive plays.
Yeah.
And then look at the draft class the last 3 years. I don't know, man. There's like you said, tier 2 sounds great, but you know, Tyquan Thornton in the second round and Mac Jones and N'Keal Harry in the first round. And I don't know, man. Luckily they got Christian Gonzalez, but these 3, these draft classes aren't great. The overspending on several offensive and defensive players to just do nothing with that team is not great. I think Bill Belichick is one of the greatest coaches, if not the greatest coach in NFL history. I think the ship has sailed. I think he is going to wind things down. And if he goes somewhere else, great. Have fun with the Commanders.
Yeah, and the defense theoretically would be better, but again, they have significant cap issues on defense. Like they are not going to have resources to add to that defense. So I don't get it. Like if you're going to hire a defensive coordinator, it's got to be somebody who has shown the ability to work in different systems, who has the ability to develop players. I don't see that with Bill Belichick. I respect him. He's the greatest coach of all time. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And you're potentially talking about a team with all of these cap issues, a roster that is currently projecting to be in the bare bones, and you're going to have to trade a first-round pick to go get Bill Belichick. Are any of you interested in trading Brock Bowers or Malik Neighbors for Bill Belichick? Because I certainly am not interested at all in that scenario. So it's just, I can't look at the last few years of what Bill Belichick has done in New England and be interested in him as a head coaching candidate. I just can't do it. People point out the Mac Jones thing. Mac Jones was a functional rookie quarterback. Like, he wasn't high end, but he was absolutely functional. And look how he ruined that career of Mac Jones. It just, his stuff does not work. And there's far too many red flags for me to be interested in Bill Belichick right now.
Yeah. But, sail into the sunset, buddy.
Go sail into the sunset for the Commanders, please. All right. Appreciate all of you guys for tuning in. I know that there were some super chats we didn't get to. We went an hour 20 on coaching candidates. So hopefully you appreciate that. That is our top 5 coaching candidates. So I think it's pretty clear we established Jim Harbaugh, Ben Johnson are kind of a tier above from everybody else right now. Dan Quinn falling short behind there. So that's where we're starting. We appreciate all of you guys for tuning in. We'll have more on coaching candidates down the road, as well as GM candidates. We'll probably have Arjun on for that one because he probably knows a lot more about those kind of guys than we do. So it should be a lot of fun. Fresh start. Excited to cover it. Excited for you guys to be a part of this as well. And we appreciate all the great support. Tyler, did you have a final thought there?
No.
Okay. Sounds good. All right, guys. That's going to do it for us. We'll see you next week. As always, bolt up.